Hello listeners, Jordan here. I just want to let you know that you can listen to Nighttime early and ad-free on Amazon Music. Include it with Prime.
You are listening to the Nighttime Podcast.
Hello listeners. Tonight's story is going to take us back to 2005 and to the city of Windsor, Ontario. This is a story of obsession, manipulation, brutality, and also of institutional failure. The climax of the story is going to take place in a hospital's recovery room where 36-year-old nurse Lori Dupont is assigned. Her ex-boyfriend, the 50-year-old anesthesiologist named Marc Daniel, works in the hospital's operating room. Given the hand-in-hand nature of the OR and the recovery room, Lori and Marc have that awkward experience of having to maintain some kind of professional relationship after the breakdown of a personal one. But this certainly wasn't a normal relationship and was far from a typical breakup. Lori had been stalked, harassed, and intimidated by the doctor, and despite her complaints to the hospital and to the police, Dr. Marc Daniel remained free to do the absolutely unthinkable to Lori and calmly walk away from it. Tonight, in this episode of Nighttime, Madelayne, Klein, and I will discuss the murder of nurse Lori Dupont, committed by Dr. Marc Daniel.
Lori Dupont knew she was in danger. She turned to the law for protection, but the law wasn't quick enough. The Windsor, Ontario nurse was murdered in the hospital where she worked. Her alleged killer, a doctor at the same hospital.
Ms. Madelayne Klein, this is our third round post-baby. The baby is sleeping soundly in another room, I believe.
She is. She's snoozing upstairs. We were 5 weeks on Wednesday, and she's doing good. We're both learning.
Learning some patience and
something that I have never had. So that's a real curveball for me.
Well, it's a very exciting time for everybody. But we're here to talk about something far less pleasant as your baby. This story that we're going to get into tonight has to be one of the darkest, most just like troubling stories I think I've ever heard. And shockingly enough, everyone I've mentioned this story to, it's completely new to them. A lot of people don't seem to know the story of Lori Dupont and Marc Daniel.
No, same here. I mentioned it to my friend today, and she had no idea. She was like, how is that story not bigger?
Yeah, I get why I wouldn't know it, but you're not that far from there, and you work in a hospital. So you would think this would be a story people working in hospitals would know of.
And I worked in the operating room, which is in close proximity to the recovery room.
Wow. And you're not a nurse. Like your job title wouldn't be nurse, is it?
No, my job title was operating room attendant.
But you would work with nurses.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It was actually, I really enjoyed my time in the OR. It was a lot of fun where I worked with, lots of doctors, lots of nurses, and it was good.
But again, interesting and surprising that you don't know this story, because this takes place next to an operating room, in a recovery room, in a similar situation that you would have been in a million times, I'm sure, in your day job, and that your coworkers would have been in. Yet it's not like a cautionary tale, I guess, for people in that industry. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, like this story didn't even ring a bell when you sent me all the information about it. So like I had never heard of it ever. And yeah, while reading it, it was like I was like, wow, hospitals across the country operate the same way.
Interesting.
So yeah.
Yep. I've only learned of it because my brother is a physician, a Dr. Bonaparte in Ottawa. Shout out to my brother. But he had told me this story, and he's like, there's this one story that you don't hear a lot about a doctor who killed a nurse that he had been stalking. And I was like, wow. And that led me to Google, and that led me to article after article, and each one just kind of painting a darker and more disturbing picture than the last.
Down the rabbit hole.
Yeah, that's exactly what happened. So let's get into telling the story. I figure we should start kind of at the end and work our way back. That seems to be the way that will make the most sense. But this is going to be relating to the stabbing death of Lori Dupont, who was murdered on November 12th of 2005 at Hotel de Grace Hospital, which is a 313-bed hospital located in downtown Windsor, Ontario.
Oh, that's really small. 313 beds.
That's what I was going to ask you. Is I wouldn't know, and whether you told me 20-bed or a 7,000-bed hospital, in my mind, that just it's the same thing.
An average one would be at least like 600 or 700 beds.
And I think it's an older building. It's right downtown Windsor, so it's maybe that's why it's smaller. And then it seems like across the country, hospitals seem to be undersized, and they're always expanding. I was at 2 hospitals for appointments over the last 2 months, and both of them were undergoing renovations to have these massive additions put on them. So
well, and I have to remember that there's probably multiple hospitals in Windsor. There's only 2 hospitals in Regina. So they kind of have to have large capacities. But in Windsor, there's probably 7 or 8. I don't know. I'm just guessing. I don't know how big Windsor is.
Well, let's get into it. Let's go through the events of November 12th of 2005. So the story largely starts at 8 a.m. when Lori Dupont arrives to her shift. She works in the post-anesthetic care unit, which people call the recovery room. She's a nurse in that area of the hospital, which to me, it seems, my understanding of it is when someone's done receiving an operation in the operating room, they would then be brought in to the recovery room where they would recover from, their surgery and the medicine they would have been given. Is that right?
Yeah, it's usually called PACU, but I had no idea until we did this story. I had no idea that stood for post-anesthetic care unit. I always thought it was PACU. Why did we call the recovery room that? And I could never figure it out, but now I know. So yeah, it's almost always on the exact same floor, just adjacent to the operating room. And that's where people recover. So
someone would get surgery in the operating room, and then they just wheel you into the recovery room and monitor you for a couple hours until you're, able to be brought back to your room or whatever the case may be.
That's right. Just because anesthetic's so hard on the body. And I mean, surgery is kind of a big deal, so you should be monitored. It is kind of a big deal.
In the recovery room, due to the nature of what's happening there, it would be an area that would be seen as quiet. There shouldn't be a lot going on in the recovery room. It's just kind of like the name implies, a safe space, quiet space to recover.
Yeah, it should be fairly low key, but some people do get violent coming out of anesthesia.
Just confused and stuff.
Yeah, confused and just anxious, I think.
Okay,
but
that makes sense.
Yeah, so sometimes people will wake up throwing fists.
Well, this happens on, again, as I said, Saturday, November 12th. Saturday is something that makes it unique. Saturdays were unique at the hospital as they'd have far less surgeries scheduled and far less staff on hand. So typically the recovery room would have 10 nurses working at one time at this hospital. But on Saturday, there was just 2. And on this particular day, it was Lori Dupont and her coworker and friend, Vivian Bitonti. So a very small staff on a Saturday. So skeleton crew, as you describe it. And also, as you described at most hospitals, it is the same in this, is that the recovery room was right next to the actual operating room, which would have had several nurses and staff, but the 2 areas were divided. So there was the main operating room, a set of doors that led to this long recovery room. So they would be 2 separate spaces. So the staff wouldn't be able to see each other directly, but they're just a short little trip away. But I think we should talk about the vibe in the room just to give a sense of what's going to happen. So when Lori arrives to the nursing station, she runs into, again, the other nurse on staff, her friend Vivian. There was weird vibes because they learned that Lori's ex, who she had a very nasty breakup with that we're going to talk about, was the anesthesiologist that was on staff. His name is Dr. Marc Daniel. And what was weird about this is Lori and Marc's breakup that we're going to talk about was so bad that all the other nurses kind of knew we got to serve as a buffer between these 2. There's a lot going on and we don't want him around us or him around her. So if Dr. Daniel comes near, we're going to, I'll kind of stand in the middle and be the one who talks so Lori doesn't have to interact with him. they were worried about him being there, and that set a weird vibe. But there was a large surgery planned, so they were kind of thinking, there may be a good shot we don't even see him because there's such a big surgery happening. He's probably going to be pretty busy. Do you want to give us maybe just the basics about the relationship between Lori and Dr. Daniel?
They were, to say the very least, it was like the most toxic relationship ever. They were together kind of on and off for about 2 years, and they had broken up in the previous February. This happened in November. But he just like absolutely could not get over her. He was actually married to another woman, and like still, even after they broke up and he went back to his wife, he would still try and contact her, and he just like, he could not get over it. And what nailed the final nail in the coffin for them breaking up for good was he attempted suicide and like blamed her for it.
Yeah, he attempted suicide and did time in the same hospital psychiatric unit, then was off work for a while. He had just, at the time of the events we're talking about now, he had only returned to work, I think like a month or two prior to this. So he was still just kind of working his way back into the regular flow of the day to day. This is the first time Lori and Dr. Marc Daniel would be working the same shift on a Saturday, which again is unique because there's so many less people there. He's not, there's not 8 other nurses kind of standing between them. He's going to be a good chance if he comes into the recovery room, he's going to be face to face with her. So obviously a weird vibe in the room. It's like, there's this saying, like, you don't date people that you work with. This story is,
and this is why.
Yeah, this is like beyond, like, worst case scenario is the story we're going to be talking about tonight. So Lori's shift was supposed to be from 8:30 to 4:30. She arrives just after 8 o'clock, gets to her desk, learns that Dr. Daniel's on that day, hopes that they don't end up seeing him. But only 15 minutes into her shift, so just about 8:45, Marc Daniel walks into the recovery room. It wouldn't be normal for him to show up there first thing in the morning. He did, and he approaches the nursing station, which is kind of like the little desk area that the nurses working in the recovery room would have their computers and their files at and stuff. He approaches, not for any particular reason. He just kind of makes small talk, and of course, Lori does what she always does. She just kind of looks off to the side and ignores him. But he starts making small talk with Vivian, the other nurse that's on duty. But what's been reported by Vivian is that as they're talking, he's not looking at Vivian. He's just staring at Lori, who's ignoring him, while having this kind of awkward small talk with Vivian. She kind of is trying to end the conversation with him just to get him out of there because it's very uncomfortable for her and even more so for Lori. When she finally kind of hints to like, all right, we got to like get on with it. There's a surgery about to start that you're involved in. He's like, okay, I'm going to go see if my patient's arrived. I'm out of here. And he walks off from the recovery room into the operating room. And the way they're laid out is he would leave the nursing station, walk across the recovery room, which is a series of beds and spots for beds, go out a set of doors, and then he would be in the area that the operating room was in. They didn't watch him walk away every step of the way, but their understanding as he walked in that direction is he's gone off to the operating room. He has a surgery starting, in a couple minutes. So, hopefully we won't see him again for the rest of the day. I think the next part of what gets Lori out of her desk, maybe you can describe that better because you've probably done things like this before.
Well, she needed to just like prep for the patient to get there and all that stuff. So she walked to like a supplies room, which was obviously on the route to the operating rooms. And yeah, it's got a bunch of stuff in it for probably like soaker pads and suction tubing and whatever else they need to recover a patient. Yeah,
the stuff you would imagine like in a drawer in a hospital. She's gone to like a little area to get that stuff. So she has to walk across the recovery room to get to this little like supply closet, whatever it is. And now, without seeing like kind of a graph of the recovery room, it's hard to explain this, but in the center of the recovery room, there's two large pillars that are just kind of like within, the way the building was made, they're kind of supporting the roof or whatever. As she's walking towards the supply room, she has to walk past these pillars that are just in the center of the room. They're not especially large, but the spoiler alert, I guess, is that they're large enough to conceal a person hiding behind one. As Lori passes one of the support pillars within the building that are in the center of the recovery room, Marc Daniel, Dr. Daniel, steps out from behind it. He had been kind of hiding himself behind it out of view of Lori and Vivian at the nursing station. He doesn't seem to say anything, but he's holding what's been described as a dagger or a military dagger, which is different than a knife. I've also heard it described as a bayonet, which would be like, a long knife that you'd have on the front of like a rifle in like the Civil War or something. He steps out from where he was kind of hiding himself behind this pillar. Of course, I'm sure she's shocked and startled. He doesn't say anything and immediately begins stabbing her. Vivian sees the whole thing as it happens from the nursing station, and she starts wailing and running towards Marc, who's stabbing Lori, not saying a word. And she's immediately down on the ground. And by the time she gets from the nursing station to across the room where they are, Marc is on his knees next to her, stabbing her. And he just looks up at Vivian as she approaches him, screaming. And he doesn't say anything. He just lets go of the knife, which is still stuck in Lori, stands up as if nothing happens, and just walked out of the room as if nothing had happened. Vivian is left hysterical, with Lori motionless and just in grave danger, with given the amount of blood that's coming out of her.
That's horrifying.
Just the idea of him stepping out from behind the pillar is like a scene from a horror movie.
And so calmly, like he was just so calm, cool, and collected. It's And this is first thing in the morning before a major surgery that he's supposed to be running. She would have been completely caught off guard. But by the sounds of it, where he walks out from behind the pillar, she wouldn't even had a chance to take off. He was like in her face immediately, very like deliberately, like steps out and begins stabbing her like it happened instantly. The attacks took seconds. She ended up being stabbed 7 times. So that's a very quick attack. Let's get into the initial response of how news of what had happened travels through the hospital, and we'll start to follow the search for Marc Daniel. So, of course, it's Vivian and Lori alone in the recovery room. Lori on the ground, unresponsive, motionless, bleeding profusely from several stab wounds. Vivian manages to pick up a phone and call the hospital switchboard to report what happened to security. And now this whole thing with like the different codes that go out, again, you've probably heard some of this stuff. So maybe you walk us through what people in the hospital would have heard through the intercoms. Well, first, a code white was called, which is a violent patient or family member, whatever. Mm-hmm. So the code white was called, and that would have sent security to the unit. And then immediately after, a code blue was called, which means like the patient is dying, and the respiratory team usually comes when, or I shouldn't say usually, the respiratory team always comes when a code blue is called. Mm-hmm. So that was the second code that was called, and that would have sent, at least at the hospital I work at, it would have sent the respiratory team, and I'm not sure who else. It sounds like it at this hospital, any doctor that heard this code, and if they were available, they went. That's what I got from like, reading. Yeah,
it seemed that code blue was understood to be like someone's about to die, and if you're a doctor, get down here. Like, code blue in the recovery room. So it's like, doctors are charging there. In the code white, as you described, which like would be like a violent patient or family member causing trouble or something. I've seen some of the staff that heard that code white in the recovery room quoted as saying like, it just doesn't make sense because that's not an area where there would be like a violent incident. Like, code white is normally rare. Like emergency room or like somewhere where there's going to be like families and patients that are more active. The recovery room wouldn't be a spot where typically that kind of thing, there's not going to be a group of family members in there or something like that.
Right. Yeah. Like it can happen, obviously. But it's just very seldom. Very, very seldom.
Yeah. So as the code white, then code blue go out in pretty rapid succession. Not a lot of doctors on staff because it's a Saturday, but 2 doctors very quickly arrive, find Lori in a pool of blood on the floor in the recovery room. They get her on a stretcher and just move her into the room next door, which of course is the operating room. So she's, I guess, in the right spot for this to happen. They get her to the operating room, but it's pure chaos because the people trying to save Lori, they know her. The nurses that are assisting them, it's like, not only is it their coworker, in some cases, it's like one of their best friends that had just been attacked. Like, so there's, pure chaos, people crying and screaming, but also frantically trying to save their friend. Despite it being from the very beginning, obviously it was a lost cause. She was stabbed 7 times, and it is said that 3 of those stab wounds on their own, regardless of any of the other wounds, would have been fatal. Two of the stab wounds pierced her heart, and that's a fatal wound. And the other one cut her aorta.
And like now I can see why it was so bloody. Like that's
the aorta is like the main flow of blood, right? That's like the highway of your veins.
Pretty much, yeah.
So when someone when there's like the stab wound in a horror movie and blood is just spraying everywhere, that's like probably like showing what an aorta cut would be.
It would be surreal. Like it would probably be as, I don't know what word to use, as surreal and bloody as a horror movie, just in real life.
And that is how it was described. The blood loss that was in the recovery room and, surrounding her as she was brought there was described as being like a scene out of a horror movie.
Well, and remember that like the operating room, as a rule, isn't a trauma center. Like the ER probably sees some crazy stuff like that. But by the time people get up to the operating room, even for an emergency surgery, things have kind of settled down.
Like they're stabilized or whatever.
Yeah. But yeah, like this whole scene, like no one could have prepared for it. And especially these poor nurses who had they probably weren't used to traumatic events like this, like where you have to react right away. So yeah, that would just be awful. And especially because like you don't expect stuff like this to happen in the ER, but they're more prepared for it, right? It's the emergency room. Yeah. But getting ready for a completely different surgery that was scheduled and then dealing with this, that would just be, that would be insane.
And then add on top of it again, is you're treating a friend. Yeah. And then I'm just thinking of Vivian, if she was involved in treating Lori, if she had just witnessed that and then minutes later is helping, and I'm thinking she probably was, because this all would have been one event. It all happened so quickly. Like what we just described, we've been talking for 20 minutes. We're about 5-10 minutes real time through the story at this point. Like this is happening fast, and it will continue to happen fast, because the next step, while they're fighting to save Lori's life unsuccessfully, the security staff and the police are beginning the very short hunt for Dr. Marc Daniel. As like people immediately, they know who did it and what happened, because Vivian had seen the whole thing. Doctors had described, as they're rushing to respond to the code blue, people had even seen him walking away, covered in blood, walking in the opposite direction of the recovery room when the code blue happened. So people, like Vivian saw him stab her. Doctors saw him walking in the other direction, covered in blood. The hospital security staff looked at the security cameras, and they have him arriving to the building at 8:38 a.m. is when he gets there, which is minutes before the stabbing occurs. And they have him leaving just about a half hour later. So he pretty much got in, got changed, stabbed her, and then walked out of the hospital covered in blood, all within a 30-minute period. And the distance even from like the parkade where the security camera films him to the recovery room, that's probably like a 7 or 8 minute walk. So this is no doubt in my mind he went into work that day knowing she'd be there and be vulnerable, the plan of killing her. Like it's such a bang, 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 one after the other thing.
Well, it sounds like he beelined it to the recovery room. He probably saw her name on the schedule and like that was his first stop. I don't work there, but you probably don't walk through the recovery room to access the operating room.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and just by the nature of the recovery room, it wouldn't be a thoroughfare. They would have that as its own quiet area so that you'd have to intentionally walk into.
Totally.
So security staff have him coming and going. They know he left the hospital. As they're beginning to figure out and try to understand, where he would have went, where could he be? Is he dangerous to other people? Police get a call from Marc's wife. So again, he was after Lori, who was his ex-girlfriend, who he dated while he was like kind of estranged from his wife. After him and Lori broke up, he got back with his wife. His wife calls the police to let them know that she just got off the phone with Marc. And he told her that he was on the waterfront in downtown Windsor and that he was about to kill himself. So it seems like he kind of called his wife and said goodbye. She called the police to report that. I don't know if she knew that he had just killed somebody else. But when police heard that call, they rushed to the waterfront. And just as she predicted, he is there in his car, unresponsive, motionless, with a syringe sticking out of his arm. So it's pretty clear what he was trying to do, but the story doesn't end here. You can walk us through what happens with Marc Daniel from here.
Well, he injected himself with whatever he stole from the hospital, but he didn't die right away. He was taken to the hospital that Lori was being treated at, attempting to be treated at, and they did get him like kind of stabilized and they got his vitals back. But he never regained consciousness and he died in ICU like 3 days later. Yeah.
And this is kind of a weird part of this is since it was a Saturday and there was only a couple doctors in the hospital, after they finish with Lori and she doesn't make it, the next patient comes in and it's Dr. Daniel. It was the same doctors who were working to try to save him. And they had to make the decision, like, are we going to treat this guy like he just killed our last patient?
See, this is why I should never be a healthcare professional, because if I were one of those nurses, I'd be like,
it's break time, so
yeah, I'd be like, this is really no rush. Why should we? Like,
yeah, in a way, but also like just letting someone die like that is letting them get away with it. I'd want to keep them alive.
That's true.
Just to pay the price, like go out peacefully in your car with a syringe full of God knows what.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem what he deserves.
But in the event he did survive, he probably would have been found not guilty by reason of insanity.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because no one is more insane than this man.
It seems it. Yeah, that's good. But either way, having to do your job in this situation as a doctor, that would be so hard.
Yeah. Oh, and after his victim like just didn't make it, the timing was awful.
Yeah.
Like it wasn't a good situation as is, but having the patients so close together too, it would just be, it would be so hard.
And now we know, as you said, Lori Dupont passed away that day from the stab wounds. Dr. Marc Daniel, his vital signs came back, but he eventually died a couple days later. He didn't make it as well, but another person's death is being blamed on Marc Daniel as well. So that Saturday morning when this all happened, there was a complicated 8-hour long, I believe, surgery that was planned. It was a 76-year-old man who had an emergency surgery planned that Saturday morning to remove a brain tumor, which had just suddenly started causing major problems. It made him unable to walk and disoriented. The tumor needed to be removed immediately. Obviously, the surgery didn't happen that morning because the anesthesiologist killed the nurse in the recovery room and everything else. So they had to delay this man's surgery to, I think it was 8 p.m. the next night. So it got delayed a day and a half. He was continuing to decline up to the point of the surgery. The surgery went ahead. They managed to remove the tumor, but he never came out of it. And that man ended up dying, and his family firmly believes if the surgery had have happened when it was intended to, the emergency surgery, he would have had at least a fighting chance, if not survived.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and it's something like an emergency brain tumor. Time is of the essence.
Yeah, like we're doing this now.
Yeah, they don't schedule emergency brain surgery for fun. So
or for convenience. It's like, this is a life-saving thing. Do it ASAP. Yeah. We're going to have to do it Saturday. And,
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's another just kind of sad part of this. But we went through kind of the end of the story. We talked about the complicated relationship between Dr. Marc Daniel and nurse Lori Dupont. But we've only scratched the surface of how bad and toxic and just horrifying that relationship is, and how viciously he preyed upon her. It's a whole separate story, and it's hearing the story of her murder as a, in a vacuum, the standalone little thing is horrible. But hearing of everything that he put her through in the years leading up to it, it's just unimaginable. And it's
just everything about this guy, what an awful person.
He is the worst person.
He is. He's like actually one of the worst people to ever walk the planet. And like in the relationship, out of the relationship, nobody had a good thing to say about him.
It seems it. He had a good reputation as a doctor. Like, it seemed like he was good at doing his job, but he also was riddled with complaints for making inappropriate comments or losing his temper on staff. And like, he seemed like just like a prick with bad bedside manners. But something about the way he did the job and his qualifications, it gave him this position of power. Like, it seemed like even the hospital management walked on tiptoes around him because he was an anesthesiologist, which I guess is a really important job at a hospital.
Absolutely. And yeah, like, he's a textbook narcissist, like for sure. What's it called? Borderline narcissistic personality disorder or something. And like, yeah, he's just, and like, I don't know if, well, I think doctors in general are treated like people kind of tiptoe around some of them just because they are like a doctor's a prestigious profession.
Yeah. Well,
like,
I think doctors deserve respect. And then there are probably some who twist that in the wrong way and take advantage of their position. And I think Marc Daniel is one of the ones who took advantage of his position as a doctor who there was great demand for. And he used that to his advantage to prey on people and be a prick and get away with it.
It said he came from a respected family, which means his dad was a physician.
Yeah, his dad was a family doctor that like was well known in Windsor.
That just tells me that his dad was also probably an asshole, and he had been getting away with this kind of behavior his entire life.
Really?
And I don't know. That's just what I assume.
I saw it more as he was like this kind of Nepo baby. Like
Oh, yeah. Oh, that could be.
He was probably raised around money, and people probably respected Dr. Daniel from the beginning because they respected his father. And he's like, I'm an important person. I've always been important, and he just,
maybe
that's kind of what I took it as. But either way, it's him and Lori Dupont didn't seem like a match at all to people who knew them. And from the very beginning, they weren't a match. So let's travel back to 2002, 3 years before the murder, and we'll follow their relationship from beginning to end. As you described, Marc, had a good reputation as a doctor, but also a reputation for flirting with the nurses, a reputation for being a bit of a braggart, bragging about his personal accomplishments outside of work, bragging about kind of like his possessions and wealth, but also complains a lot about his failing marriage, complaining often to the young nurses.
Well, and it's probably never his fault. And this is all textbook narcissist.
It is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Of the nurses that he would brag and complain about his failing marriage to, one that got a lot of his attention was Lori Dupont. Was said by everyone who saw her to be a very beautiful, attractive woman. She was recently divorced, and Marc just from the beginning seemed to have a thing for her. If she was around, she was going to get attention. And it often wasn't even just social attention, like him just making small talk. He was actively like asking her out, trying to get alone in a room with her, cornering her, and saying inappropriate things. So he's just like preying on her, and it was borderline harassment, so much that other nurses were encouraging her to file a complaint against him. They're saying that's sexual harassment, what he's doing to you. You need to report him. But she didn't want to do it, probably because of the power imbalance between Nurse Dupont and anesthesiologist Dr. Daniel.
Well, she didn't want to rock the boat, and we'll get into a little bit more of this later, but she probably knew that a complaint's not going to go anywhere. So why waste your time?
Yeah, because if you're going to complain about him, you got to know that he's going to be gone after your complaint, because you definitely don't want to face him having just complained about him and nothing happened. So if she thought, he's just going to get away with it, they're not going to do anything to Dr. Daniel. Yeah. Why complain? That's just going to make everything worse.
And it sounds like there had already been complaints lodged about him, because all this flirting was not reciprocated. And he's just obnoxious. Yeah.
And if you see pictures of him, I saw a couple. He doesn't look like, he doesn't look like this attractive, charming man. He just looks like a creep.
Exactly. Because I was like, okay, like maybe he's like super handsome and super charming. But no, it sounds like he was neither of those things. And I saw a photo. He's definitely not handsome to me. Not my cup of tea. No. So yeah. I was just very, very confused. Yeah. But
so early on, Lori Dupont is not interested, avoids him for the most part, and the feelings aren't mutual of whatever's going on. But at some point along the way, she does give in. She doesn't go public with the fact that they're dating, but they do begin dating during 2002. However, it's kind of like they're like seeing each other. It's not like a serious thing. So they're not, making public appearances together or like holding hands at the hospital. It's just kind of behind the scenes. They're together somewhat is how it seems at first.
Well, and like clearly he doesn't care about his marriage, but he was still married, whether they were still living together or not. When he started his relationship with Lori, he was still very married.
And when he ended it, he was still very married.
And when exactly. Yeah. So I imagine she kept it on the DL partly because of that, and partly because she just kind of wasn't really into it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like she was, at any point in the relationship, it doesn't seem like she was very proud to be with him. And it seemed like she knew that her friends wouldn't approve of it. Because as we go through the relationship, there's multiple times that she seems to back away from including him with friends or family or anything. But really, like, what changes everything is this real estate deal. So as we mentioned, Lori Dupont had recently been divorced. She had one child, a daughter named Taylor. After her divorce, she wanted to get a house to raise her daughter in. This is in 2004. So she had been dating Marc Dupont somewhat over the past year or so. But in 2004, the opportunity comes up to buy like the perfect home, the exact home she wants to raise her daughter in. It's at a price point that she can afford. Everything is going good. She's going to buy it. But then what happens is there's a competing offer. Someone else is interested in the home, and the two kind of bid themselves out of Lori's price range. So it's at the point where she's about to lose the home. And Marc, he steps in and he offers to pay the difference. He says, you can still buy this house. I'll pitch in the rest of the money and we'll do it. Like, I'm not going to buy the house. It'll be your house. They just kind of arranged, I think you'd call it like a private mortgage. Like, I'm going to lend you the money to buy the house and you can slowly pay me back as if I was, the bank. That was the kind of agreement. And that's just such a bad idea.
Oh, absolutely. Like the power imbalance there. And he had different motives.
Certainly. And I'm sure he did. And we'll see that as we go, because this real estate deal, and she accepts it out of desperation, I'm sure, because she just wants to get things settled and get life moving for her and her daughter. She accepts it, but he will use this against her right up until the very end. So again, initially the house is for Lori to raise her child in, but Marc's not cool with that. He wants to live in the home. He really pushes her to live in the home. She resists somewhat, but eventually agrees. But they come up with the agreement that It's my home. If anything ever changes between us or goes wrong, no questions asked. You're just gonna leave. And he agreed to that. However, as we will come to learn, is he had a way of dealing with kind of every roadblock that came up in their relationship. If there was any kind of disagreement that was major, or if they were close to breaking up, Marc learned that he had a surefire way to get Lori, who by all accounts was a good person that cared about others. He had a surefire way to get her to take him back or see things from his point of view, and that was to threaten to kill himself, which is a very unhinged thing to do.
Unhinged, abusive, like manipulative.
Mm-hmm.
And I was going to say, like, if someone ever does that to you, first and foremost, call the police or call 911, because if they are actually a potential danger to themselves, they're going to need it.
Mm-hmm.
But, we've all had friends who dated a psychopath and had them threaten this. And very few people try, but he was one of them. He was one of the ones that actually followed through with attempting suicide after he said he would.
Yeah. Apparently there have been multiple times that he threatened it and several times that he tried it. We'll talk about one specific time because it's a suicide attempt that will lead to the breakup, but there's still a lot more to the relationship before we get there. Their relationship, it starts off slow and kind of behind the scenes for the most part in 2002. It's around 2004 that the house purchase happens. At that point, Marc moves into the home. Almost immediately after him moving in, things are changing for Lori, and her friends notice it. She's much more withdrawn. She's not taking part in, socializing and stuff. She's letting her appearance go. It's just, I guess I would just describe it as like showing the outward appearance of depression and being unhappy. So as that's all going on, Marc is seemingly sinking his teeth into her quite a bit, but it will reach a head in 2004 with one of the more awkward engagements. Marc is going to propose to Lori, and he's going to do it much like he always does, in a position that gives him the advantage over her. He waits until Lori and Marc are invited to a birthday party at Lori's parents' house. During the birthday party, the whole family is sitting at the kitchen table, and it's at that point that Marc pulls out the box with a ring in it and kind of pushes it across the table to Lori in front of everybody. And the reaction, as I hear it described, seems like a very awkward moment. As he pushes the ring to Lori and she opens it and sees the ring, her daughter sitting next to her, Taylor, who isn't a big fan of Marc, because when Marc moved in, everything changed. The dog's not allowed in the bedroom. Taylor's not allowed sleeping in the bed with her mom, which she enjoyed doing, are two of the major changes. When the daughter Taylor sees the ring and realizes what's happening, she gets up and runs away from the table. She takes off. And Lori's father confronts Marc with, "Aren't you married? Like, what is happening here? Aren't you still married?"
Which this reaction totally backfired, because he proposed in front of everyone for two reasons. One, because she can't say no, or she probably wouldn't say no. And two, he wanted to look good in front of everyone else. But everyone was like, this guy is weird.
Yeah.
As hell.
Yeah, but it happens. She agrees.
Yeah.
I can't understand that, but I can't put myself in the mind of like an abused, manipulated person, and it seems like that's what was happening here. But
definitely
the house purchase and that whole thing, like, for me as an outsider not in this relationship, I'm like, no, terrible idea. The engagement, terrible idea.
Yeah, from an outside perspective, I think everyone said that. Terrible idea.
Yeah, but she agreed. So the engagement is in place. They have plans to get married. They're living together. Lori is continuing to be letting herself go and withdrawn from friends and family. Marc's next step to further sink his teeth into her seems to be what will lead to their breakup, their permanent breakup. What Marc wants is, he has a problem with like Lori really enjoys her job working as a nurse in the recovery room. She's friends with the other nurses, and that is probably her escape, leaving her house, going to the recovery room and just probably sitting, having coffee and chatting with the other nurses. That's like her probably her happy place at this point in her life. Marc found that she was working odd hours, staying late, taking overtime when it was available. He didn't like that. He wanted her to take a new job or leave that job. What he wanted her to do was take a job working as seemed like kind of like an assistant to him in his room, which would have only been a part-time job. So she would have been working less. And when she was working, she would have been reporting to him. He really wanted her to take that. And so if the house purchase happens, I'm sure she's like, shit, I shouldn't have done that. The engagement happens. She's probably a part of her is like, why did I do that? I think this is the one where she sticks her feet in the sand and she's like, no, I'm not doing it. I don't want to do it. And
well, when it comes to your livelihood, and so Lori was well liked and he hated that. He absolutely hated that, which is why he didn't like her being there. And working odd hours and stuff, taking call and whatever else. She probably she was a smart woman. So she knew there was writing on the wall and that she had to get out of that. So she probably was like, no, I need my income. I hope she had a secret bank account and she was planning on bailing. Yeah,
I hope so. Because even with the engagement and stuff, you say Lori was well liked. We've already said he wasn't. What she was doing is he would brag around the hospital like, that's my wife. We're engaged now. We got all this big stuff. What she was doing, if he wasn't around, she would turn her ring around so the diamond would face the palm of her hand, so it would look just like a more modest ring or whatever. Yeah. So it was so bad that she was doing that stuff at work and whatnot. But anyway, she didn't accept his offer to quit her current job and work in a position where she would be more so reporting to him and working less hours.
So her entire life would be controlled by him, essentially.
Yeah. So she fought for that. He did not like that, and he kind of demanded a sort of family meeting about it. They had plans to sit home this particular day. I don't know. I think it was a Sunday. We're going to meet Sunday morning, and we're going to discuss this situation. There is
no situation to discuss. No,
I feel like that's probably about what she said, because this meeting resulted in pretty intense disagreement that sees Lori leave the house. She takes off done with you. Whatever happens in this meeting, she's like, I'm not quitting my job. I'm out of here. Leaves the house upset, which is, pretty good thing to do if you're upset with your partner. Get away for a little bit.
Yep.
She does, but she shows up back at the house. I think it's 5 or 6 hours later. So spent most of the day out just doing errands and shopping and probably some retail therapy. She comes home, walks in the house, probably thinking oh shit, here we go. What's going to happen now? She walks in the house and she finds Marc sitting on his bed, their bed, and he's holding a syringe. And as she walks in the room, he just simply says, look what you did. And he sticks a syringe in his arm and injects something and just collapses to the floor in front of her.
And what a drama queen. He probably sat there for the whole 6 hours waiting for her to come home that.
I think he did. Well, one of the things he did is he wrote a series of notes. He had kind of suicide note, goodbye notes to different people that were all on the bed with him. And the notes would explain why he did it, and he was blaming Lori for ruining his life and so on and making him do this. So he clearly blamed her. But here's where it gets interesting. This is only, we're just months before her murder. This is early 2005. She'd be killed in November of 2005. But here's what's interesting, or one of the weird twists. He does this. He attempts to kill himself in the bedroom, falls to the floor. Lori calls 911 to say what has happened. They're sending people, but she knows it's going to take them a couple minutes to get there, and he's dying on the floor. Lori's mom just happens to be next door. I don't know if Lori's parents live next door or what, but her mom is next door. So Lori calls her mom, and who is a nurse, and is like, get over here. We have to help him this is what happened. So Lori's mom gets to the house. Her and Lori try to stabilize him while waiting for, first responders to show up. And they're credited with saving his life. Whatever they did to keep him alive, that without them, it's unlikely that he would have made it. So she basically saved his life a couple months before he did this.
Bizarre. Unbelievable.
Now things are changing because this suicide attempt is different. It wasn't like threats or anything like that. He actually went for it, and he was in rough shape. So he's sent to the hospital to be treated, but he's also going to be put into psychiatric care. And it's at this point that is kind of leading up to the murder, because he's taken off work, and he has a couple months where he can't work because he's receiving psychiatric care as a result of this suicide attempt. But this gives Lori her first break from him in a good amount of time. So it's now she's free from him, at least temporarily, to tell, her mom and some friends, exactly what's been going on, and, and how bad this is. So it's now all, very clear what's going on to everybody. So this is her chance to leave him. And she takes it. When he calls her from the hospital after recovering from the suicide attempt, she tells him it's over. They're done. He doesn't like that. Despite being in a hospital bed, he's not cool with that. He continues to call her so much she changes her phone number.
And this is 2005, so it was like a landline. It wasn't just a cell phone.
Actually, here's another way to describe how bad it was. It was so bad that Lori's mom went to the hospital where he was being treated to meet with him, to tell him, stop calling. It's over. She doesn't want to talk to you. It's done. You're done with her. To have your mom go to the hospital to meet your fiance who had just tried to kill himself. That's a pretty intense moment.
Right. And they're not teenagers.
Mm-hmm.
They're this woman's in her mid 30s.
Mm-hmm.
That's crazy.
Yeah. He spends about 2 months in hospital after the suicide attempt before he's free to leave, and he goes back with his wife.
I want to know how that conversation went. And I wasn't in that position, so it's easy for me to say, but oh my God, never. I wouldn't even have opened the door.
Yeah. I just wonder, this wife to take him back, I wonder what kind of hold he had on her to be able to get her to be okay with the fact that he got engaged to this other girl, bought her a house, moved in with her, tried to kill himself for her, about her.
There's no way that this was the first time he had cheated on her.
Yeah, or did something nuts.
Yeah, exactly. Oh.
Marc moves back, gets out of the hospital, gets back in with his wife. A part of getting their relationship back on track is Marc and his wife decide immediately to go on a cruise together, an all-inclusive kind of boat cruise thing.
Oh, I guess he had the time and the money, so why not?
Yeah, I guess gets a break from work, and this is what he does. But it's pretty clear that he is not over Lori. He makes several attempts to call her from the boat.
Oh my gosh.
She won't take his calls.
Poor wife. That poor woman.
Yeah. Not only was he calling Lori, because she wouldn't take his call, he was calling her parents, some of her friends, and they were saying, she's done with you. Let it go.
Imagine a 50-year-old man behaving this way. Oh my God.
It's got clearly he's obsessed with her. And as we go here, we're now leading into the months up to her murder. It only gets worse and more unhinged. That's the thing about the story. Despite starting with this brutal murder, we're continuing to just ramp up and up and up and up back to it. And it's we're getting close, because in April of 2005, it's about time for Marc to begin to return back to work slowly. So the suicide attempt happened at the beginning of 2005. A couple months later, he's now starting to slowly work back to getting into the hospital.
Well, and what really annoys me about this part of the story is that he had a couple of his psychiatrists, psychologists, whatever, give him a raving review. Being he's doing so well. And it's is he really that convincing, or was he friends with these people?
Yeah, I wonder, hey?
I wonder if they had some sort of history, because he's clearly not mentally sound. There's something very clearly wrong with him mentally. So I don't know how he was cleared by more than one professional.
Yeah.
He can't be that convincing.
Yeah. And it's like as disturbing as these glowing reviews from like psychiatrists and stuff are, also the way hospital management deals with his return to work and the stuff he gets up to is even more disturbing. Because as soon as he's back in the hospital, he's back at Lori. He tried to confront her on multiple occasions, but she refuses to talk to him.
Good.
But here's where it really gets bad. At one point, just after after he's back in the hospital, he confronts her. She won't talk to him. We don't know exactly what they said to one another, but the next day, as Lori leaves work, she finds a photo just under her windshield wiper blade of her car, and it's a photo of her semi-nude in some kind of a precarious position. Right away, she knew what was going on and she knew it was Marc. So I'm thinking he probably threatened her with something like this. And
yeah,
she's seeing that he's going through with it, but he ramps it up because he puts the photo under her windshield wiper one day. The next day, he goes to Lori's father's office and tells her father, I want the money from the house that I gave for Lori to buy the house. If she doesn't give me the money, I'm going to put photos of her all around town, of naked photos of her. And to show Lori's dad that he's serious, he shows Lori's dad the photos. And what the photos are, it doesn't sound like it's, like homemade porn or something. It's like photos of her like getting out of the shower or using the bathroom, where in some of them, like she doesn't even realize he's taking these pictures of her.
Right. They weren't like nudes that she sent to him. They were, him being weird and taking them of her without her knowledge.
Bizarre. And it would have had been at a time when their relationship was better. So it's like, what the hell was he up to? And he doesn't only show up at Lori's dad's office to do this. He also calls Lori's mom and gives her the same spiel. If I don't get that money, these photos that I have of her naked or semi-naked are going to be put all over town. And that has to be one of the most unhinged things you could ever do.
Absolutely. And like, again, I know I just said this, but like, imagine a 50-year-old man acting like this.
He's
and
deranged.
Somehow getting cleared by psychiatrists. Bizarre.
Mm-hmm. Him going at Lori and confronting her was one thing, but I think going to her parents is crossing the line. And that's what finally convinces her to go to hospital management to let them know what's going on and to tell them that he basically blackmailed her. The management of the hotel confront Dr. Daniel, and he denies it, but there's no question that he did it because, yes, he denies it to the hospital management to not have it affect his job. But at the same time, there's kind of legal stuff happening about the ownership of the house. And in the legal documents, he admits to having done this. So it's like as far as the legal case, he's like, yeah, this is what I did. And, I wasn't actually going to release them. I just wanted to scare her out of desperation to get my money. To hospital staff management, he's like, no, never happened. Outright lie.
Which doesn't surprise me because he's probably lied through his teeth to them before.
Yeah. And I think he feels like he runs the hospital.
Oh, totally.
And
they're like, they need me.
Yeah.
He's like, they need me. I'm important.
Yeah. The way the hospital handles it initially is they don't take it too seriously. They tell the security guards, simply keep an eye out on the recovery room, operating room area, because there's kind of a domestic thing happening there. They're not like, watch them or hang out there. Just if you see anything, you may need to separate them or, just keep an eye out. It's about as far as it goes. Separate to going to the hospital, staff also goes to the courthouse in attempting to get a restraining order or like a peace bond that would require him to stay away from her and not contact her. I could talk a bit about this because I sat through some of these peace bond hearings before, but when you try to get a peace bond or a restraining order, as people call them, you file a paper at the courts and that paper is presented to the person that you are saying like needs to stay away from me. That person can do it the easy way, which is sign it and say like, sure, I accept it. I won't go near them. Or they can do it the hard way and say, I don't accept this. A judge will need to decide, and we'll have a trial, and the judge will decide if what I've done requires me to stay, 50 feet away from them, or, whatever the conditions are. Marc Daniel does not take the easy way. He wants to go to trial. He doesn't think he should have this peace bond. The courts, being ever so speedy, they schedule the hearing for the peace bond in December, which turns out to be a month after Marc kills her. So it's April 11th. She requests the peace bond. They have a trial for December to find out if it's valid or if they're going to have one. So that would give him freedom to approach her and, whatever, bother her, stalk her, harass her up until then, which is very awful.
Well, much like the legal system, the healthcare administration system, and in many places in healthcare, nothing moves fast. Mm-hmm. So you can file as many complaints as you want. And if something ever comes of it, it's not going to happen the next week or the next, it's ridiculous.
Yeah, well, we'll see that with kind of the rest of this story, because the hospital starts kind of getting involved in this dispute. They kind of tiptoe into getting involved in the situation between...
But like bare minimum.
Absolute bare minimum. One thing they do is they remove Dr. Daniel's access somewhat to the hospital through his swipe card where he swipes in. I think they did something where he could only swipe into certain areas where it would be necessary for him for his job. And maybe he could only access the hospital like when he was scheduled to work. So they did some stuff reducing his access, but he was still able to return to work and work, right alongside where Lori Dupont was. And not only that, it's like his return to work was a complete shock to people. The fellow nurses that work with Lori, they just showed up for work one day, and on the schedule for surgeries for that day, they saw, oh, Dr. Daniel's back. After trying to kill himself and stalking Lori, he's working today.
And not a word was said to anyone. It was just like, make this work. Sorry. Yeah. Actually, I don't recall them saying sorry.
No, I don't think they did, because in fact, they went way less than sorry. I think what they did is it's at this point when Marc returns to work. Put
their head in the sand.
Yeah, well, the hospital management seemed to, but the hospital staff, specifically the nurses that work with Lori, realizing we need to protect her. It's at this point that they start kind of forming this unofficial buffer where if Dr. Daniel comes, the other nurses know okay, we got to be the ones to handle it, and Lori will stay at the nursing station. So that's the kind of agreement that the nurses have. The nurses do complain to hospital management and are told that, this is a domestic disagreement between the two of them. It's none of our business. We need to stay out of it. That's, for the most part, seemed to be the attitude they took about it. And
you can restrict as much access as you want. The recovery room is accessible from the OR, from my experience, 2 open doors. You don't need to swipe in and out, because the anesthetist is the one that rolls the patient to recovery.
It would be, they can restrict his access and all this, but the spot that he needs to be is the part that she works in. It's the
That's
worst
correct.
part. Yeah. The other nurses are complaining about him. Lori had complained about him. Staff knows what's going on, but he's continuing to cause trouble, not even just with her. There are other complaints coming in about Dr. Daniel. Twice in June, so he would have only been back 2 months. Twice in June and once in July, 3 separate nurses complained of him making sexual comments towards them or touching them inappropriately. That didn't cause much of a problem. But it's going to come back to something you just said. Another thing that happened is on August 19th, another physician in the hospital went to hospital management and gave them the warning saying, someday Dr. Daniel is going to come in here and go postal. People noticed he was this guy's nuts.
Quickly spiraling.
And here's what's interesting. So these different complaints from the other nurses and staff of the sexual comments and inappropriate touching, there was going to be I don't know if it'd be a disciplinary or investigative meeting with between hospital management and Dr. Daniel, but that too would be scheduled for, I think, a month after he killed Lori. So, the hospital, the courts, it's all moving way too slow to get ahead of this horrific event that's on its way. The last kind of attempt to save Lori is one she did on her own. Another job came up in the hospital that it was in another, like, I think it was a similar job to what she had, but it was in another area of the hospital, which would have put her away from Marc. She applied for it, and just before her death, like I think it was like a month or so before her death, she found out she didn't get that job. So if anything, that was one of her last attempts to put herself out of this situation. Just sad.
Super sad. Well, and like with all these other complaints, there's a paper trail. So there was a paper trail before all of this was happening because other people had lodged complaints. And now there's even more complaints. You'd think that they would not only jump on the opportunity to do so, but be able to take action against this guy and be like, you have X amount of complaints against you. You know, you're taken off the schedule, or you're whatever. We'll let the college deal with it. But, or at the very least, if things aren't working out because of this idiot, they should have transferred Lori themselves to another unit, whether her seniority was whatever, or whether there was room, or they needed to put her somewhere else at the same pay grade and whatever.
Yeah, I would have thought, like, if she had said to the hospital management, like, I have a restraining order application against the guy right here that I'm always around, and we don't have our trial until December. Can I just reassign me to a different spot?
Exactly.
For 6 months or whatever. Like, that seems, she shouldn't even have to ask. That's what should have happened. That's like, that would have been such an obvious thing to do, or even just give her unpaid leave. Like, if you don't want to screw with this important doctor, just give this one nurse a couple months off. And it just seems so obvious that there is a solution there. Now, she doesn't get that job, but her last week, we're just catching up to the events that played out in November in the recovery room. Her last week before her death was a week where everything seemed to be improving for her. Do you want to walk through some of the things that were happening in her life during her last week?
Well, she had met a new man. His name was Norbert, and they were right.
His name is Norbert Hirth. That sounds like a character from, like, I don't know, like what's the
Zelda,
Headless Horseman?
a video game?
Yeah, no, you know the Headless Horseman? Ichabod Crane and his friend
Sleepy
Norbert
Hollow.
Hirth. Yeah, it sounds like something from that. But anyway, she met a man named Norbert Hirth.
And yeah, things were going really well. She ended up just like not even a week prior, like 5 days prior, she found out that she was pregnant with this man's baby. And I believe they orchestrated to like elope, go get married.
Yeah, on a Disney, they went to, after finding out she was pregnant, they went to a travel agent to plan a Disney cruise to bring the two of them, and to bring her daughter Taylor onto the Disney cruise. She would have had to come out of school for a couple of weeks. They were going to take her out of school for a few weeks, go on this Disney cruise, and get married.
Yeah, so things were looking up, and fairly quickly. So that was nice, but it would be short-lived. It was not even a week later.
It was November 7th. She found out she was pregnant. Probably like within a day or two, she was at the travel agent trying to book the Disney cruise. On November 12th, so 5 days after she found out she was pregnant, was the Saturday shift where Dr. Daniel.
Sounds like she went to the travel agent before she went to the doctor. She was hurrying this along.
Well, it's just exciting news.
Well, right.
I think you can relate.
That's what made me like, and that just adds another tragic layer onto this. But the fact that she was murdered so soon after she found out she was pregnant makes me wonder if, and she may have not had a chance to go to the doctor, but that makes me wonder if this guy was keeping tabs on her medical file somehow.
Oh, if Dr. Daniel was. Yeah, I never thought about that. It is said that he didn't know much about her relationship with Mr. Hirth, and they kept it fairly private, probably because she was being harassed and blackmailed and threatened by her ex. And I don't know if they've ever learned if Dr. Daniel knew about their engagement or the pregnancy. But you know what I think it was is I think this was the first Saturday that they worked together, Dr. Daniel and Dr. Dupont and Nurse Dupont. I think that's what it was. It's just, this is the day that
he saw an opportunity and took it.
But I think he came to work knowing like he would have had to bring this dagger or whatever to work, unless he had it stashed in the hospitals somewhere. But
he is that unhinged. But yeah, it was fairly premeditated. Well, and he had drugs ready to go to give himself.
That's right. Yeah, because he had this all just kind of worked for him in that regard. But
well, that's another thing that kind of confused me. So the first suicide attempt, he injected himself with something with a syringe. That tells me he's stealing drugs, which is a big no-no.
Which is he should be fired.
Which should be another reason to, at the very least, keep him out of the operating room or access to drugs. It's really hard to get a physician's not rights taken away, but their privileges taken away, I should say. But it's like next to impossible to get one fired. But
I think if you think of suicide but take it out of the context of this whole domestic violence thing, that's a delicate issue because it borders on mental health and depression and all this stuff. So I think if they treated it just as like he went through a mental crisis and did that, like maybe they didn't want to throw the book at him for that reason. But when you add kind of the layer of like, and it was all in the context of domestic violence, this is just such a horrible story of, and she just seems so helpless in this, like
trapped, helpless. And it's so tragic because there were so many points where it could have been avoided.
And it seems like every attempt she made to do something about it was like, in 8 months we'll have that meeting and you'll have this hearing in 8 months. Not that I think he would have obeyed it, like if he had a restraining order or whatever it was, but it's something. Like if the only thing that really was working was like the other nurses helping her out. And the one time she got with him in a position where they weren't there to help, that was when he was able to kill her.
Yeah, safety in numbers, I guess.
Oh, certainly. If there was,
which is so unfortunate. And I would normally, in like a weird, awful situation like this, I would say, nobody probably thought it would come to this, but literally everyone did. Like even another doctor was like, he's going to go postal one day. Just a warning.
Yeah.
And it fell on deaf ears.
Yeah, it reminds me of a lot of other stories. I definitely see some commonalities between this story and the story of Gabriel Wortman, who is the gunman behind the Nova Scotia mass shootings. There's some similarities there. It seems like it's a narcissist who had a woman that he was able to control and did not want to let that go. It's just that I feel so horrible for everybody involved in this story. Lori's parents were in the middle of all this. Like they were so involved in every bit of it. Like they're there for, the engagement. They're there saving him when he tries to kill himself.
I couldn't imagine the regret they have. And like the hindsight's always 2020. They're probably like, oh, like we should have said this. We should have done this. And it's out of their hands. So,
and it definitely shines a light on workplace, like stalking and domestic violence within a workplace, with especially with the power imbalance thrown in as well. Like I'm sure so many people would have encountered, whether it's a doctor or a manager at the office. Like we do our series Encounters with Creeps. We have a lot of episodes and a lot of stories that come to us that involve someone with an imbalance of power coming onto someone. And it's like this story easily could fit in one of those if it had ended with, and then I quit the job and never saw this guy again.
Yeah, exactly. There are probably so many nurses that have a creep story specifically about Dr. Marc Daniel.
I bet.
And you just know he walked into the OR and numerous nurses were like, ugh,
oh, him again.
Daniel's here.
Yeah.
Or like they saw the schedule and were like, oh, I'm on call with that clown.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
I'm surprised that this case isn't more often discussed. We said this at the beginning. I'm surprised it's not more often discussed in hospitals or even workplaces in Canada, because it's like whether or not it's a hospital, any workplace, this same story could take place. And this could be a Saturday at some office, or, you know, a meeting room at a call center, or the kitchen at a restaurant. Like it could be in any, or a convenience store and the owner comes in. You know, it's any one of those places. It's just this, you know, if you work for somebody and they want to do harm to you or try to take advantage of you, it's like they're in such a position that they're able to in a lot of cases. And this is certainly one of them. And this is an example of how bad it can get.
Yeah. And so quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Like, just, like it's how you can't predict something like that.
Mm-hmm. And as far as lawsuits, I believe the hospital settled with Lori Dupont's family. But yeah, I think
nothing's gonna rectify this.
Yeah. The whole applying for the peace bond mixed with, while we're waiting for the trial, you're still working with this guy. That should never be able to happen. There should be some kind of like intermediate kind of peace bond where it's like, until the actual hearing, you have to do this, that, and the other thing. But again, not that I think that would have changed anything, but it's just this idea that she's just fed to the wolves, with the only people that can protect her are her fellow nurses.
Yeah, exactly. Off the record.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's anything we've learned from all the true crime that we've, researched, it's restraining orders do nothing.
Seriously.
Zero. Zip. Nothing.
Yeah. They only do something to kind of like, they're only effective if the person that's bothering you is like, doesn't want to break the rules and doesn't want to get themselves in trouble or whatever. But in Marc Daniel's case, it seemed like he had no problem dying. He wanted to just take Lori out before he did. So like a peace bond's it's not going to stop him.
He's like, I don't care.
Yeah, I'm just going to kill her before I kill myself.
Yeah.
And this
he had nothing to lose.
No, and this money about the house, that's irrelevant. Like, this guy had a lot of money. The 140 grand-ish that he lent her, that wasn't going to change anything for him. That was just something that allowed him to stay in contact with her and a justification for bothering her. If she had to give him that money cash the first time he asked for it, that wouldn't have changed anything. It would have been something else.
Yep. And it was just another way to control her. He didn't care about the money. He didn't probably even want it back. It was just a way that he could sink his claws into her even further.
I want to thank you for joining Madelayne and I for this episode of Nighttime. Now, this story is a very difficult one to imagine, but I think it can serve as a cautionary tale. If someone seems dangerous, don't take any chances. And when someone shows their true colors, believe them. Now, I'm going to start wrapping up this episode, but before we part, let me end here with some thanks. First, a big thanks to Madelayne for sharing an evening with me and with you, the listeners of Nighttime. A big shout out to Monty Datta, who contributes the music for this episode, and LJ from the Dystopian Simulation podcast, who provides the intro and outro voiceovers. And then lastly, but most importantly, a massive thank you goes out to each and every one of you listening, as without your interest and your support, Nighttime would be as pointless as it would be impossible. Now, on the topic of support, let me thank the newest subscribers to the premium feed. Gail, Adam, and Tiffany, I appreciate you. And for anyone else who'd like to show your support for the show, you can help us out here in a variety of ways. First of all, a premium feed subscription costs just a couple dollars a month, and that money funds the creation of the show. But perhaps more attractively, the premium feed gives you the episodes 2 days early, gives them to you ad-free, and gives you access to a full back catalog of episodes. If that sounds like something you'd like, you can go premium right now at patreon.com/nighttimepodcast. And even if you don't want to go premium, you can still help the show out by simply sharing this episode on social media and letting all your like-minded friends know what we're doing here. If anyone listening has any story ideas or wants to give feedback or an opinion on an episode, you can do all that and more at nighttimepodcast.com. We hope to hear from you. But until then, take care of each other, hug your loved ones tight, and let me know if you see anything weird.
The Nighttime Podcast is written, hosted, and produced by Jordan Bonaparte.
I mean, Lori Dupont faced something horrific, and to me, what came out of that, I mean, I think it's important for her loved ones to know that while this tragedy happened, that things are coming out of her situation to prevent it from happening again.
You know, just one person out there can make such a difference. They can just break that terrible chain of events that can lead to death.